I'm Ramses Madou. I'm the chair of the board of the Open Mobility Foundation. And it is so incredibly exciting to see this room packed and actually oversold for an organization that's only lived for 5 years. This organization is based on collaboration. It's based on coming together and convening and building out the value in our mobility system for governance and for private business. And seeing the conversations that have been going on today, seeing the people that are here, is really inspiring for the amount of time that me as a public official have to put in to make this happen. So it's really great to see this paying off. We have people here from many levels of government, from many countries. We have people here from nonprofit organizations. We have people here from the private sector, all trying to make this happen. This is we're convening here to progress the state of our community and trying to check in with each other about what's happening, where are we going, right? What have I seen? I'm trying to give a little bit of a first take on what this day has meant for our community, right? First, the core question I've heard across almost every session is, what problems are we trying to solve? What are we focusing our energy on? What do we as a community care about? And the overall answers that I have heard are, one, that we're continuing to try to solve the problems in mobility, right? It's still transportation. In what ways? We're trying to improve governance. We're trying to create a community that enables governance through data-based fact-finding and then management on top of that. We're trying to improve safety. We're trying to improve access. And we're trying to improve business, right? We want governance to work better, and we want companies to be more profitable. How are we doing that? We're co-creating a digital mobility system that improves public outcomes and enables more profitable businesses. We've revisited our history today, starting from all the way earlier today, talking about that Minneapolis hotel basement and the initiation of the micromobility services that flooded our streets, that created the moment that we realized we needed to have a better way to communicate between public and private sectors. From that Skunk Works piece, right, we created a community that is now all of us sitting in this room trying to create, continuing to build on that vision. Today has reaffirmed for me what the core value of the OMF is. It is convening. It is coming together and talking about the problems that we on the governance side and the private side both face. And then we create a standard that expresses that expresses what the public needs are, and it expresses what the business needs are, and progresses those things together. Data is the launch point. I'm kind of going to run through a couple of really great quotes I heard today. Data is the launch point for having a coherent conversation between the public and private sectors around needs and solutions. With better information, we can create better policy outcomes and make more money. Another theme that has come out constantly is adjusting to change. The federal government change is giving a lot of us anxiety in cities. Maybe not as much business, but okay, we'll see, right? We're built for this. This is what this organization is about. We have created a stronger voice for cities by coming together and saying what we want together, by saying and coding it into data standards that express what we need. And that gives cities a stronger voice in all of the conversations. By being able to come to the federal government and say, here is the facts in data as it is coded across the country in all of these areas, we're able to tell a more coherent, strong story for why we need the things we need. And I think that this is a defense that we as cities need right now as the shift happens at the federal level. Hopefully it's not as bad as we all might imagine, probably be very different than we imagine, but I think that we're in a much stronger position than we were last time this happened, because we've come together that much stronger, because we have a stronger combined voice. In this, one of my favorite quotes today was, There's no reason to stumble around in the dark on our own. This community stumbles around in the dark together. And in doing that, we're all cutting weeds in a shared field or forest, right? We're creating a space together that's more and more defined every time we add a little bit more to the standard, every time we talk a little bit more together. And it's pretty powerful. Mobility happens at the city level, and all planning is local. The OMF has enabled cities and private partners to lead and create an international marketplace for mobility solutions that are built on cities' needs and greater profitability. And I keep hitting that note there. Data is the basis for making better decisions and policy. Data creates the trust that we need with the public to take ventures with the governments and invite private partners into trying to solve those problems together. All right. Let's see. I'll just say a couple more things here. I want to highlight the SMART grant. The SMART grant is focused on developing out CDS, the curb data specification we have. 10 cities got $2 million each to do this. This is a $20 million investment from our federal government and this community's ability, trust in this community's ability to produce meaningful change. And it's doing that. And this, to me, is really the kind of quintessential story of how the OMF works. We're creating a data specification that is based on cities' needs, and we put it out there into the community, and each city takes a slightly different angle on it, takes a slightly different perspective on what it means to implement it, pulls in partners, and solves it in the way they need, and that then feeds back into the community, augments the spec in the way it needs to be augmented, creates more opportunity for businesses, and each city and each company then shares those approaches and further expands that bubble of ability that we're creating. And I think that, we're just seeing a really great version of that, and seeing the session on that was really meaningful. Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for spending your time, your money, your energy on making this community continue to be strong and growing. And we hope to see you going on for many years. Now, we're not done yet. We have one last session, a very exciting session, that's going to be introduced by our partner, Umojo. Rick Neubauer is going to introduce that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ramses. Appreciate it. My name is Rick Neubauer. I'm the founder and CEO of Umojo. Hold on a minute. I got a little ahead of myself already. I've been in parking for 14 years, mostly in the off-street space. We do command center and automation for garages. We've got about 3,500 locations around the country. And I really started to get into computer vision and on-street. And frankly, it's because I lived in Chicago, and I would park in front of my office for 30 seconds to get something from the office. And I come down, and there's a $100 ticket on my window. You know, I'm like, man, what? And they're really good in Chicago because it's privatized, as you all know. And so I thought, man, there's got to be a better way to fix this. And of course, across the street from my office is a 2 parking spaces in front of a church that no one ever parks in. And for 7 years, we've been in our parking space. And my question is always like, why isn't that parking spaces except for on Sundays? Or down the street in front of a hotel, there's 7 parking spaces for a cab stand, but there's no cabs anymore. It's all Ubers and Amazons and pickups and drop-offs, what have you. You know, why isn't it 2 spaces for an Uber pickup and drop off and 5 spaces for parking, right? I don't have to find a place to park, or it's express parking, what have you. And so again, it was just like, hey, there's got to be a better way. So we got into curb management, and what we kind of found was that a lot of cities have siloed out data. We want to aggregate it all together and to provide kind of a clearinghouse. And we got involved with the OMF, and we're a premier member, but also on the steering committee for CDS. And it's been really, really great to see all the cities, start to combine and work together to work on the standard, to advance it and to make it evolve into what it is today and where it's going to go, right? We're involved in 4 of the Smart City grants right now, including Seattle, for example, that we're doing some co-opetition is what one of my marketing guys came up with, which is basically we're working with a competitor to provide a CDS to CDS 2-way integration with CurbIQ. And what's been interesting to me about it is just the reality of where CDS was started to what it is now, to what we see when we go and put all this stuff out there in the real world and see what what the reality is compared to what it was when it was first designed, right? Kind of our approach is that first of all, we LiDAR scan the city. I'm a big proponent of LiDAR. We use computer vision to extract signage, parking spaces, loading zones, EV chargers, even bike lanes, travel lanes, bus stops, and then we'll digitize all that down to about 6 inches of accuracy and map it out on our mapping system, where we use computer vision with solar-powered cameras, which I'll talk about in a minute. We've got an integration with pretty much the who's who or the usual suspects, so to speak, in on-street and off-street vendors and what have you, from enforcement to mobile payments to meters, what have you. We usually get about 4 to 5 years of historical data, current data. The interesting part about this is that probably 2 or 3 of all these vendors can talk in CDS. The rest are all standardized APIs or whatever. So what we've built is really an aggregation or clearinghouse, if you will, to take all that data and however they talk to us, and then we spit it out as the Curbs API, Meters API, Events API, and Metrics API. So this is kind of some of the stuff that we're doing today. For example, this is an overview of occupancy versus enforcement in a heat map over, like, for example, this is for this month, where that happened in this particular city. Some of our cameras here are solar-powered LTE cameras. There you go. This is a little bit better view, 180-degree view, mounts up on the light pole, and we get kind of a pretty good view of lots of spaces that we map out and provide the real-time availability and inferencing for, and of course, providing analytics. Now, part of the reason I wanted to bring this slide up is because this is what this next session is really about, which is all this data is great, but if you're not putting it in a user experience or an interface that people can, digest and actually use for whatever their role in their work is, then it's kind of information overload, right? Just a bunch of pretty colors on a dashboard and what have you. So one of my big things that I think is what we're really all about is jobs to be done approach, to where we have a user interface and reporting and analytics for people to really drive it to where they can use the data to make informed decisions, right? So without further ado, let me introduce the next person. Oh, one last thing. We have a cocktail party tomorrow. Not for tonight, tomorrow, just to make sure. The QR code's up there if you want to scan it and sign up. I believe it's at, what's it called? Eat, Drink, Americana, thank you. I couldn't even remember the name of the place. Let me get to... All right, so next I'm going to introduce is Teodora Popescu. She is an award-winning graphic journalist and creative manager at KUOW. It's Seattle's NPR station. She manages all the data visualizations, graphics, illustrations, and video projects for their website. And without further ado, I'll let you take it away.
All right. I know there's some Seattleites in the crowd today, so hello. Woo, okay. So I am going to close it out, and I'm going to be a little faster than originally planned because we're behind, so I might skip some things. But we're going to talk about how to tell stories that people are actually going to remember. Important, correct? Okay. So why am I the person talking to you about this? I am in the news. I am not in transportation. Mainly it's because I am the creative manager at NPR, which means I do all of the data and visual stories, as was already noted. I'm also the content editor at Nightingale, which is the Data Visualization Society magazine. That's a mouthful, but basically it's a bunch of graphics and data nerds, both in news and in academia, that come together to talk about the industry. And I'm on the board of the Society of Professional Journalists, where I mainly try to get more graphics journalists into the fold. So I am acutely aware of how difficult it is to get the public, or even just a distracted audience or a skeptical audience, to pay attention to your data story and to understand it. So we're going to talk about it, but we're going to first kind of set some reality. So in my spare time, I sometimes teach at UC Berkeley in their multimedia journalism department. And one of the things that I like to tell my students is that the reality is that you are walking into a conversation that has already started. Nobody is going to give you their full attention. They might actually come in with some priors about who you are, what you do, or what they think transportation should be in this context. And you essentially have to be the person in that sitcom. Pick your favorite sitcom. I put up How I Met Your Mother, but choose your own. where they are all sitting down having this lively debate, and you're that one cast member that runs in and has a whole complicated story to tell, and you need everyone to pay attention to you right now and notice and recognize what the story that you're telling. So, how do you be that person that runs into a conversation that's already happening and get people to pay attention? Well, one of the kind of less discussed parts of that equation, which is what I wanted to spend my time talking to you all today about. By the way, can you all hear me? This mic is, okay, great. Is cognitive load. So one of the ways to really get something to stick in the mind of your audience, especially if it's a data complicated story, is to really pay attention to the cognitive load of your audience. How much are you asking them to take in? So in the data viz world, the concept of cognitive load is basically just that it's the amount of energy it takes your audience to understand what you're telling them, the story, and then retain it for later, right? Those are two pieces of the puzzle. And the way that kind of we break it up in our domain, there are other ways to do it, is through, oh boy, I'm just now noticing that the fonts did not load correctly. That's unfortunate. Okay, well, I'm just adding a little cognitive load for you all. You have to try to figure it out in real time with me. So this will be a good test. Okay, so it's made up of 3 parts. You have intrinsic load, which you're not going to be able to read that, but basically that's your data. How complicated is the actual data that you're bringing to the table? The second part is applicable load, which is your audience. What do they know? How much about your topic do they know? It could be a blank slate, it could be bad things, right? And then the final piece, the piece that you have the most control over, is extraneous load. That is the actual visualization. How are you representing your data story? What does that look like for the audience? So we're gonna walk through a checklist of these 3 parts of cognitive load, what you can do to kind of level set between like a light or heavy load to get the outcome you want. So, my goodness. We're going to go ahead and, okay, I'm going to skip this slide in what it actually says, and I'm just going to tell you what lighter cognitive load versus heavier cognitive load means. So, on the left-hand side, essentially, you can min and max these situations that you have simple, clear data. You have a very kind of like easy delivery method, so people can see one little chart or what have you. And you can have it so that your audience is experts, right? Like when you're talking to other transportation experts. That is a really light cognitive load. People already know what you're talking about. They can quickly see what you're trying to tell them, and your story's not that complicated to begin with. That's on one side of the spectrum. On the other side, a heavier load would be like, you have really complicated, nuanced data. You have an audience that's never heard of this before, like maybe people who are tuning into a city council meeting and hearing about your contract for the first time. And you have a complicated delivery method with a lot of clickable buttons and all those things. That's the 2 sides of the spectrum. Neither side is good or bad. It just depends on what your goal is. Okay, so we're going to talk first about intrinsic load, the data. I'm going to quickly go through this because we have some fun audience participation in the later parts, which hopefully won't be messed up. We'll find out together. Okay, great. This one is less messed up. All right, so intrinsic load, the data. It gets broken up into, essentially, each of these has 4 subcategories to make it easy for you to kind of checklist. But the way that we like to think about it is that you are pulling the levers between your data, your audience, and your visualization to meet that point that's going to work for what you want. So the first thing is measurement. That's a pretty obvious one between quantitative and qualitative. Quantitative measurement is going to be a really light load for your audience versus qualitative, which is heavy because it's squishy. What do I mean by that? Well, an example of like a quantitative data set is heart rate, right? A patient's heart rate is a number, it's clear, you know what it means. That's an easy lift. On the qualitative side, a patient's pain level is squishy, right? This has been a problem in healthcare for a long time. In fact, to the point that they've tried to quantify it, and this is what we end up with, right? So the amount of qualitative versus quantitative will put a more strenuous load on your audience, right, to understand what the data is. Next one is knowability. What I mean by knowability is not the knowability of your audience, but you. How certain are you that your data is correct? this is a problem sometimes because certain data sets might be really difficult to capture, or the methodology you're using might actually skew your data. One example of this is, I'm using Target in this reference. So knowing the number of Target stores in the US, you can be certain about that. That's an easy thing to do. Knowing the number of people in every Target at any given time, that's a lot more complicated, right? That's gonna be a more uncertain data set, and that will make it harder for your audience. Okay, specificity, whether it's precise or ambiguous. So, specificity is one of those things that I think we forget and don't put on the table as often. So I'm gonna use this as an example. Humans love putting things in categories. I think sometimes we think that if we can put things in categories, then it's clear, our data makes a lot more sense, and that is true. But your categories could end up leading to some ambiguity, and that is actually harder for your audience. One of the ways that this comes up a lot in the news, but also comes up for civic engagement, is in maps. So right now, as someone from Seattle, I can look at this map and go, I don't know if these neighborhoods are accurate. I'm from Seattle, no idea. But I am positive that at least one person in this room from LA is gonna go, that neighborhood's wrong. It's not what you call it, that's not the right size, like that's just not right. And that's because neighborhoods are a more ambiguous categorization, right? They're not as specific of a data set. Versus if we did this as zip codes, everyone would agree on the zip codes, but how useful is that, right? So this is what I mean by there's a trade-off between light and heavy cognitive load. People have to work a little harder on the neighborhood front, but maybe that makes more sense for the story you're telling, right? Okay, relatability. Is it concrete or abstract? This is my slight little pitch as someone who works in news and has to deal with a lot of city and nonprofit data. Boy, the abstract concepts are real hard, and maybe we should start to think about ways to make things more concrete. So, I can tell you right now that if I put out a graphic that describes what's happening with inflation using the cost of lunch, everyone will get it. If I put it out talking about the GDP, I'm just gonna get head nods from most people, right? So how abstract or concrete you make your data will have a huge impact on how likely they are to remember it later. Because if you don't have a very good grasp of what the GDP is or how that factors into your life, you're not gonna remember it. We actually have a term for this in the data viz community. This is the big number problem. Anytime you get a number too big, whether it's money, people, it doesn't matter what it is, it makes no sense to people anymore, and they don't remember it. Okay, we're gonna get to the fun part. It's definitely gonna still be messed up, so we all just need to kind of accept that and move on with our lives. Applicable load, the audience, which right now is you all. Okay, so I've already made it harder on you because my slides are messed up. Okay, so applicable load has another round of 4 things we're gonna go through, but we are gonna start having some audience participation. All right, so the first one is connection. What is the connection your audience has to you and your work, right? Intentional versus coincidental makes sense, but think about it in terms of like, is this someone who signed up for your newsletter? Or is this someone who came across a post on the internet? Is this someone who came across a public hearing but has no idea who you are? All of that factors into how much of their time and mental load they're willing to give you, right? Their relationship to you. So, you all came here thinking this is about transportation. So I am going to test you a little bit on how much cognitive load you're willing to give me by putting up something completely unrelated. If you know who this is, do not say it out loud, but raise your hand. Ooh, more than I thought. Okay, all of those people, put your hands down, you're not participating. Someone who doesn't know who this is and is willing to take a guess about what this story is about. Now, there's a headline above this visual that I have purposely blocked out because I want you to try to guess just from the visual what this story is about. This is where I would need a mic and a volunteer. Who's willing to take a guess? Who doesn't know who this is? Thank you. What do you think this story is about?
Thank you. I know the WNBA championships recently happened, and that looks like a basketball jersey, and maybe they're on the losing team.
What made you say the losing team?
They look like a little bit stressed, and a little battery being low.
Yeah, totally. And you can get a lot of that. You are almost entirely correct. This is indeed about the WNBA. It's about performance in the WNBA. You get a lot of cues about what this is from the jersey, from the fact that this is not a photo of Caitlin Clark having a good time, right? And from the depleted battery. This is not even a data viz, but it just shows you how much you can tell someone in 2 seconds from the way that you design something. And if you don't care about sports, you can still connect to this and understand part of the story, right? You might not pause on it as long as someone who does care about sports, but you might still get what's going on. Thank you, appreciate your participation. Okay, so similarly, I paid for your data or content, that's pretty intentional. I came across your stuff on Instagram, that's what we just talked about, right? Or, you showed up for an event and you're at this keynote and it would be awkward if you left this room, so you're stuck here. Okay. So then we're going to go to pace. And by pace, I don't mean your pace, I mean your audience's pace. How much time are they willing to give you? You got their attention, now how much of it do you have? For how long, right? That can tell you how much you can throw at them. So, one example is like a 1-hour presentation at a conference after everyone's had coffee and when people are excited to go to drinks, versus you have 5 minutes on a board meeting agenda, or you have a grant application that you've put out, but it's like a place that has 1,000 of them, so they're going to give you 5 minutes of their time, right? You have to factor that in because no one is thinking about you or your data or your story as much as you are. So you need to tailor it. Okay, now we get to the one that is going to be a fun audience piece for me. Knowledge. This is talking about the amount of knowledge or information your audience has about your topic, potentially about like the very specific data set, right? Maybe they actually helped contribute to that data set, it's possible. So that will impact how much they do or don't retain of your information and how much you should give them. So this is another one we're gonna do some participation. Nobody say anything out loud. Raise your hand if you know first what this is a map of, the place, and also what it is showing about the place. Whew, much fewer people in the room. Okay, all right, go ahead and yell it out. What is this a map of? What's the location here? Yes, this is indeed the map of the setting for Game of Thrones, for those of you who are unaware. And now on top of that, this is obviously fake because it's a fake land, but someone has put together what they think would be the sedimentary rocks, the geology of Game of Thrones. So the reason I bring this up is if you have no knowledge of Game of Thrones, you have a lot more work to do in this room than everyone else. And what I mean by that is first, you're probably going, what location is this? And then you have to, on top of that, notice, okay, we're talking about sedimentary rocks, okay, there's a lot of data here, versus someone who knows maybe enough about Game of Thrones to recognize Westeros. They're gonna work a little less. And then the people who are big Game of Thrones people and immediately go like, I know what that is, they're gonna work the least, right? Those are different audiences with a different amount of knowledge that is going to factor into how much they remember about your story. Similarly, what about this one? Who, raise your hand if you think you know what this is about. Okay, all right. For time, I'm not gonna pick on anyone to say it out loud, but I'll go ahead and point out there are 3 things happening here that you either know all 3, know 1 or 2, or it's all new for you. So one is that we're talking about Utah, right? So it's a little blown out on here, but in the original version, it's pretty obvious if you are from Utah, you know the area immediately. The second thing is that this is showing you safety index on main roads. So if you're familiar with the safety index color scheme, you already have a leg up. But if you don't, you have to also learn that on the fly and be like, okay, this means this means that, got it. And then on top of that, the roads themselves, the size of them is showing how many daily users they have on that road. So they're trying to pack a lot of data in here, which kind of makes sense if you're like, oh, I want to really compare these items, but it is more work, right? If the audience isn't familiar with this kind of road size measurement, if they're not familiar with the safety index, these are all things that they have to learn. And are they willing to do that for you? I don't know, depends on your audience. Okay, So just kind of honing in on that, an expert in your field is going to have a lot more leeway and a lot more headspace to engage at a more nuanced level than, a novice. They should not have the same presentation or the same graphic. Okay, and finally we hit on confidence, which I think, again, kind of like working our way down. Confidence is one of those things that gets left off the map a lot of times, especially for more complex data. But what I mean by confidence is the user's confidence that they know how to use the thing you've given them in the format you've given them. They know what button to click to make something happen. I think everyone in this room, and I say that because anyone in this room is a nerd, any nerd is going to over-index on confidence. They're going to think the audience knows how to do more things than they do. It's just true. Okay, raise your hand if you know what you're supposed to do if you saw this online. Okay. For those who don't, this is a photo slider, and essentially it gives you a before and after, and you use the little arrows. Now, it's not super hard to figure out, but again, it does require a certain level of knowledge, right? That one's a pretty simple one. What about this one? Raise your hand if you're familiar with this format. Much fewer people, okay. So this is what I like to call my bittersweet dashboard data viz experience. This is created, I believe this one I pulled from, I don't remember what city agency. The thing is, they all do it. They all use, they all do. I specifically didn't pull Seattle's because I knew there'd be some Seattleites in the room, and I want you on my side. ArcGIS, the lovely ArcGIS, which is connected to both the Census Bureau and all these other places, lets you create these really dynamic dashboards with a lot of intersecting data that is incredibly helpful for journalists like myself. Nobody in the public will ever use it. I'm sorry, but they won't. And the reason is that it's actually quite intimidating if you've never dealt with a dashboard like this. And now I know that some of you are like, I don't deal with the public. Don't worry about that. I'm almost sure that any analyst that doesn't already use this system is also going to give a little bit of a glazed over eye look at it because I've seen it happen. So my point being that you want to pay attention that you are presenting things in a system that your particular audience is willing to learn or already knows. And also, this is just a shout out for the Seattleites in the room. Please move to something else for Seattle data. Okay, now we're gonna wrap up with extraneous load. Okay, at this point, you should have a basic idea of how complicated your data is, a basic idea of what your audience is willing to afford you, and now you can use all that to create visualizations that might actually be remembered. Okay. So, on that note, the first thing is actually picking the right kind of chart, data viz, whatever you want to call it, right? And there's again, no right or wrong answer. It's about your goal. We're going to go through a couple of examples here between common things like bar charts and rare things like Sankey diagrams, which are my personal favorite and don't get enough play. Okay, this is a game I play with my Berkeley students. I call it this or that. So, I'm going to give everyone a second here. The data is more or less the same between these two visualizations. I know it's a little tough to read, but basically, raise your hand if you like the one on the right. A couple of people. Okay, raise your hand if you like the one on the left. Ooh, okay. All right. Now, I think undecided. Ooh, I like that. Even better. Okay. We have enough time that I do want to get one person who chose the one on the left, the arrow plot, to say why, if that's possible. I think do we need a mic or does someone feel comfortable raising their hand and just saying it? I don't see a hand raised. Hey, go for it. Okay, great. Sorry about that. We'll have another one, so. The changeover time is great. Okay, so this is one of the most telling ways to test how many nerds are in your audience, because generally speaking, folks like the bar chart because it immediately tells you information. You don't have to read it in any particular way. But for data nerds like ourselves, we do like an arrow plot because you get both the current data as well as the change over time, like you said. You get that added benefit. But if you've never seen an arrow plot before, it might just read as a bunch of numbers that you have to sort out, right? So again, it totally depends on your audience. And I will say that arrow plots don't print as well if you're doing a report or a PDF that you're sending out to, prospective grants, city folks, whatever it is. So there's a good and a bad to this. But I also like the arrow plot because I like knowing the change over time as well. It just depends on what your goal is. Okay, what about this one? Raise your hand. I'll give you guys a second. But, okay, raise your hand if you like the map. Okay, raise your hand if you like the tree map, which is the square. Okay, great. So, for time, I'm not going to have people answer why, but both of these were in the same New York Times story where they basically pulled the same 5 data points and just displayed them in different ways, knowing that different audiences will react to that. So the map here is, like it says, a dot represents every death from COVID. Now, the point of this was to really just show big impact, right? You immediately see the impact. However, if you are a certain type of audience member, you might see that and go, well, that's just showing me population density, right? Okay. You don't get the same impact feel, right? So for those folks, something like the one on the tree map will resonate more with you, as it did with me, because it's breaking up those deaths by job, and you suddenly see just how dangerous it was to be a retail worker, to be a manufacturing worker, right? That's really powerful. That does take a little more effort, and that's not for everyone, but this is the same data set. This is how powerful choosing the right visualization can be. Okay, what about this? Raise your hand if you know what this is from. What publication it's from. Yes. Okay, this is indeed the needle. I took everything off of it, and you all still know it's the needle. That, again, is the power of a good visualization, right? So just want to hone in on, less is more sometimes. This one I only included in here because I'm on a mission to make everyone learn that a Sankey diagram is an option, especially for complicated workflows and financing. So just putting that out there. Okay. Had to get that in there. Okay, so on to the next thing, interpretation, right? Accurate versus approximate. Essentially, what is your goal for your audience? Do you want them to come away with a specific number, a very accurate understanding of your data? Or do you kind of just want them to get the vibe? And there, again, no right or wrong answers. So I'm gonna power through these because I know we're short on time. This is an example of accurate, right? People can walk away from this and go, I know the, vote turnout in Romania. Percentage. I know it, right? That's very accurate, and that's a good thing if this is your goal. However, you could do something a little more approximate. How many people remember this from last week? It's a little blown out here, but raise your hand if you saw this last week. Yeah, okay. So this is definitely not accurate. You're not gonna be able to, if I asked any of you to look at this and tell me what the vote count in any direction was in a particular place, you wouldn't be able to say. But you have the general story, right? You have the takeaway, and it's quite impactful. So again, none of this is a one side is better than the other. It's about what your goals are. And on that note, here is something that you might not have seen. This is from Mona Chalabi. She is the graphics editor at The Guardian. She also runs a highly successful Instagram account with a lot of data viz on it, but she does this illustrative style. So this is an example of a combination, right? She's doing the approximate thing here where she has these squares that are the size of them in relation to each other is the data viz. And that's quite approximate. You're not gonna actually be able to tell the exact numbers from that. But then she also adds in the numbers to really highlight the point, right? So it doesn't have to be an either or. This would kind of be in the middle of that spectrum because she knows her audience. Okay. Then we get down to composition, right? And this kind of goes hand in hand with interpretation, but it's essentially how much stuff are you actually putting in your data story? How much do you expect people to read? Is there context around it? Is it really cluttered? Like, what is, what are you literally presenting to people? And for this, I think this might be our last this or that, so take it in, really enjoy it. Folks who like this one here on the left, raise your hand. Nobody. Okay, so everyone likes the one on the right? Is that what I'm hearing? Okay, all right. I'm going to take some guesses as to why, and if you have a different reason, then we'll come to you with the mic. So these are actually the same graph. This one on the left was version 1. The one on the right was the printed version they ended up with. The Economist went through a couple of revision rounds. So they were right in terms of what their audience would want, right? And part of it was that they were trying to compare a couple of countries, and they realized that the one on the left, all of the countries blend together, and the multicolors makes it confusing because you're not sure what those colors mean. And so instead, they decided to highlight the countries they're actually talking about, and then take everything else that was more of like context setting, putting it in the framework, and have that be opaque in the background, right? So you still know where these countries stand in comparison to others, but that's not the main point that they want you to learn, right? They also took the axis descriptors and moved it so that you can actually read it left to right instead of on a horizontal or on a vertical there. And they just kind of cleaned up a little bit of the styling so that it's easier to immediately notice Brazil and then the other countries that are highlight labeled. Is there any other reason that folks liked the one on the right more? No? The grid. The grid helps. It helps you see proximity from one to the other, right? Yeah. Again, small little tweaks. The data is the same, the chart choice is the same, but the composition is different. Okay. I lied. There's a couple more this or that's. So both of these are representing the same general story in very different ways. How many folks like the warming stripes, as they're now known? Okay. How many folks like just the line chart? Okay, all right. So I will say that these are meant to do different things, but they're both interesting in that the warming stripes really, like, there are no axes. You just are supposed to get vibes, right? You just get vibes. But it's very effective and it fills the screen. Warming stripes won a bunch of awards a couple of years ago in the Dataviz community. But on the right, you have essentially a chart that really wants to draw your attention to the longer contextual story. And that is quite powerful, right? And then it also adds in this projection element, which is a little hard to see on the screen, but the red in the line chart is the projected, the estimates for the future. And I think that tells the story potentially more dramatically than even just the very red that you get on the warming stripes. But again, same data, and they just chose different ways to compose it. Okay, now we're down to the last one, which is your delivery. So in the Dataviz world, we talk a lot about explanatory versus exploratory, and what we mean by that is on one side of the spectrum, really light load for the audience is if you are walking them through it. You literally, you are gonna look at this data point and this one, the end. Versus exploratory, which is more of like, here's all of our data, do what you want, click any button, combine things yourself. And again, no right or wrong answer, it depends on your audience, how complicated your data is, all of what we've talked about so far, but it is a consideration you have to make because one size does not fit all here. So this is an example, again, from climate change work. I almost said Climate Pledge, which is an arena in Seattle for my Seattleites. Okay. So essentially, this can feel a little overwhelming, but what I think is really interesting about this graphic is that it is a static attempt at doing an explainer, where it's walking you through different pieces that it wants you to know. It wants you, if I had a little highlighter, I would do it now, but it wants you to immediately see 2015, and then February 25th. And then they're going to tell you a little bit about the Arctic ice cover. And then they definitely want you to look at this blue line. All the other lines are kind of just there so that you get context, right? They are pulling things out for you in what is probably a very complicated data set that they could have made interactive, but they chose to highlight specific points that they think are important to their story. Versus something like this, which came out last week as well from, I believe, the New York Times as well. Didn't mean to go all in on them, but here we are. You could go into incredible detail on any place that you wanted. They obviously hadn't finished filling it out because not all of the votes are in, but this is about as exploratory as you get, right? You could go really, really minute detail. And again, this is not good or bad, it's just about the audience. And I will say that this was placed inside of a story where they had key takeaways up top and one kind of like takeaway graphic of the night, and then this, right? Because they were like, if you're still reading, then you probably also want this, right? So again, know the cognitive load you're putting on your audience. Okay, and with that in mind, we have finished, and we have finished only 2 minutes over, which I'm gonna count as a personal record of mine. So, appreciate all of you. Thank you for your time. I hope that, and I'll also say that there is a link, I didn't put it up here, but happy to send it around, a checklist where you take that whole cognitive load, everything we went through, and you can literally checklist what side each of the points lines up for your data. So, use it.
Can I get one more round of applause for Teo? That was fantastic. Thank you. An amazing way to wrap out a set of conversations that really bring you to the point, data is worthless without the ability to communicate it effectively to your audience. Your audience can vary widely, but without the ability to communicate it effectively, you can have the best data in the world and it will fall flat. All right, so that's going to be definitely one of the themes of the takeaway here for today. With that, I want to bring forward to give a couple brief remarks. A really important partner for this event, a really important partner for the event that is coming up tomorrow and on Thursday. Very own John Razant, the founder and CEO of CoMotion.
Thanks, Andrew. Wow, what a day this has been for the OMF and for us. I just want to say a couple brief words about how happy we are about the close partnership between the Open Mobility Foundation and CoMotion. It's not something that dates from last year when you inaugurated your OMF summit at CoMotion. But it goes back actually many years because we share the same origin story in effect. It was because of LADOT's seminal work on digital infrastructure, on the 2016 publication of Urban Mobility in a Digital Age, which led directly to the creation of Open Mobility Foundation, but also attracted us to LA, and it's the reason why we chose LA as our headquarters. So we're just great deal of gratitude to you, Andrew, to Angela, to Eileen, to the team at the OMF. We have a great program tomorrow and Thursday, and I'm delighted that many of you, most of you will stay on for that. It's very dense. There are many workshops, keynotes. We're less focused on the real nuts and bolts and tools of mobility that you've looked at today, more on sort of the broad policy implications of what's happening. We're, of course, focusing a lot on the Olympic Games, which will be a very important theme for the next few years here in Southern California and Los Angeles, on the continued rollout of electric mobility, on ports and logistics. It's a very big part of the local economy here, as you're all aware. So I think that's it. I think we're so aligned in terms of what we believe at our two organizations. I think CoMotion stands for a future of sustainable multimodal mobility in our cities. I think we all share a common belief that our cities have to be cleaner, have to be safer, and better, more equitable places to live in. And transportation and mobility is the vector for realizing so much of that. So thank you very much. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow and Thursday. And congratulations for a really great OMF Summit this year. And we look forward to next year.
Well, again, thanks, John, and thanks to the CoMotion team, especially the production team that helped put on today, make it possible. I'm very excited about continuing these conversations that weren't necessarily begun today, but were certainly the kind of an ongoing journey into the next couple of days of CoMotion. Before you stop hearing from me, I want to take about 2 minutes and I want to thank a few folks. I want to thank the OMF team who helped make this possible, and in particular, Angela J. Ketty, who is responsible for the program. And so really the speakers that you heard from, the content, the ability to enjoy this event was thanks to the blood, sweat, and tears of Angela and the rest of the team. Also, Angela's family, thank you for lending her to us to help make this happen. Also, our partners, you see listed up here on the screen, could not have done this without you. The OMF Summit is not a money-making venture. It's a venture to help cover the costs of putting this event on. We couldn't do it without the really strong partnership here. But engagement in the OMF is what makes everything we do work. It's about all of you participating today. It's about many of you who get our newsletter or who tune in to the monthly MDS and or CDS working groups. It's those of you who join our webinars or other ways of participating in the community that we help support. It's that engagement that's why we exist, and that really enables our work to be successful. Also, membership. We are, at the end of the day, a membership organization representing more than 65 public agencies and multiple commercial companies. If your agency or your company are not a member, please consider becoming a member. It's another way of showing really strong support for the work we do and enabling us to be sustainable going forward. So in addition to these great supporters of the OMF Summit, I want to go through quickly a list to give you an idea of the members, the commercial members who help make all of the work we do possible. And a huge thanks to all of them. So Blue Systems, Curb IQ, Eve Air Mobility, Modi, Passport, Umojo, Inrix, Appiway, Clever City, Cruise, 11X, Transito, I saw Gene here somewhere, Turnstone, Urban Radar, and our friends at Waymo. I want to give them a round of applause for helping support the work we do day in and day out. And we actually started something new recently. You can now become an individual member if you find yourself in the consulting category of work. So something else, if you're curious, talk to the OMF team to find out more about. With that, I want to turn it over to a really amazing partner and friend, Ariel Fleischer from Waymo, to help bring us home and turn this over to our happy hour and let the drinks start flowing. Ariel?
Hi everyone, my name is Ariel. I do policy research and strategy for Waymo. We are really proud and excited to be part of the OMF. It's a wonderful organization. And I know, like all of you, I really enjoyed today's thoughtful and really thought-provoking conversation. And I'm excited to continue that at the happy hour tonight, which Waymo is really pleased to be sponsoring. So it's at a bar, bar. I won't give you all the details. But first, something really exciting. I think most of you guys, or hopefully many of you, saw that today we announced that we went what we call direct to Waymo 1. We removed our wait list, which means that anybody right now, pull out your phone, download the Waymo 1 app, because you can be a Waymo rider. There's no longer a wait list. We had 300,000 folks on our wait list until today, so we're really excited for this milestone. Obviously, a lot of real strong interest in Waymo here in Los Angeles. And for all of you, literally just you, please don't tell your friends, just you, OMF Summit attendees, you are going to get 25% off 2 Waymo rides this week. So again, for you folks, we're really excited to be sponsoring and really excited to be providing this additional discount for all of you. The way it works, you're all pretty tech savvy, I imagine, but download the Waymo 1 app, set up an account if you don't have one already, And then if you go to the account tab, hit offers and promotions, put in OMF Summit, 2 M's, 1 T, and you'll get your discount will be automatically applied. As we did go direct to Waymo 1 this week, your ETAs will probably be awful. Sorry about that. But still worth the ride. It's very fun to take your first autonomous vehicle experience if you haven't, so I highly recommend. And we can talk all about it at the happy hour. And if you're still doing hashtags and stuff, you can always tag us in your post, which is very exciting. I am not. All right, well, thanks, everyone. Excited to see you guys at Far Bar for our happy hour.